What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Dynasty Underdog. Billy Beeman here. I got Jake Kornblum with me, and very, very good friend of ours, Tommy B, co-host of the Superflex Super Show, is joining us again. How you doing, Tommy?
Thanks for the invite, guys. I really appreciate it. I love what you guys do, like something different than just about anyone else in this space. So yeah, it's an honor to be on the show.
Oh, that's crazy, crazy, great praise. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Last time you were on, we talked a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of it about your orphan strategy, which is really honestly a timeless episode, like evergreen content. You can go back and check that out, and there's some really good stuff there. But we wanted to bring you back on. I think I told you last time when we talked, I don't know if you remember, but I was like, you and Jake think very, very similarly. Like, he wasn't on the pod, but I was like, I really want to get you guys together. So I'm stoked to kind of bring you guys back, bring you on and bring you all together. So really excited for the show, man. Really excited.
Me too, man. And Jake, we've actually been able to podcast just for a moment or two together, haven't we? Like you
I was
joined
gonna say, yeah.
like a totally random stream that we did, didn't you?
Yeah, I didn't want to tell Billy that I cheated on him, but I cheated on him, and we got to see each other, live in the flesh. And by in the flesh, I mean virtually in this beautiful world of StreamYard against his will. He never even got to say whether or not I can like broadcast myself on someone else's show. So it was a beautiful experience. I got to meet Tommy. We got to talk strategy, got to meet some of the other listeners within the Superflex Super Show Discord, which was really awesome. And yeah, it was really wonderful time. It's nice to meet Tommy, before he's officially here.
Well, not only are they cheating on me on the side, they're also planning dress codes without me. As you can tell, clearly I'm dressed way down for this occasion. but nonetheless, we're very excited to be here. So yeah, let's get going. We're going to talk a little bit. We've been talking a ton of film content. We're talking about like film evaluations with Matt Waldman and Jagger May, and really great conversations. But I think we're going to take a step outside of that a little bit today and talk, a little bit more strategy and stuff like that. So yeah, let's get going. Jake, I know, we have a bunch of questions here, but why don't you kick us off?
Sure. So it's actually funny that you even alluded to the fact that we try and be a little bit different at Dynasty Underdog. It's not because we're literally trying. I think we just are different, unfortunately. we're just
for better or worse.
Yeah, exactly. We're a little bit weird here. And so I wanted to learn a little bit more about you, Tommy. Like, I think it's great that we always ask our guests, like, oh, tell us a little bit more about yourself. But I don't believe in that. It's kind of boring. This isn't me trying to interview you. So instead, I wanted to ask, we are constantly like within our little sanctum of a group between Uriah, Billy, and myself, we're always trying to wonder like who we're making content for. And oddly enough, it becomes a cyclical thought process, right? Who we interact with, who we engage with, who we want to engage with, who we listen to. So it makes me wonder, who is Tommy B making content for?
So I'm totally going to turn this question around on you guys. I hope we're ready for that part.
Always.
Because let me first ask a question. If nobody ever listened to your show, would you guys show up every single week and talk fantasy football?
Definitely. I ask myself that all the time. Because the audiences are fairly limited compared to like a CBS podcast or something like that. But I definitely show up here and keep going for sure. I just enjoy it.
I think that's why I listen to you guys and why I enjoy the content so much is because it's real, right? And so the folks who are putting out content, A, that's strategic, and B, that's actionable, but most importantly, that's genuine. People who are playing Dynasty, who are actually doing these things and thinking about them critically, those are my people, right? Like, I'm gonna say something that sounds mean in a second. I'm gonna preface this by saying I love the listeners. I think that they're great. We have a Discord that's like a few hundred people strong, and they're always interacting. Like, I love the super friends over at the Superflex Super Show. But if nobody listened, I would still do what I do in exactly the same way. The reason that I create content is, it's multifaceted. It started out where I wanted to be respected in the space. And so I wanted to like be really planful, have a lot of numbers and processes that would back up my positions, right? And I think that is the foundation of a good content creator in the fantasy football space. But ultimately what I wanted to do, and I was DMing Russ Fisher when I was just getting started, Dynasty Outhouse, and he was asking me, well, what do you want to do in this space? There's a lot of people that have, numbers-based decision-making processes, and they can optimize and they can do the things that you do. What makes you different? What makes you Tommy? And I was like, well, I look at data differently. I'm an energy manager, and I pull from all these different facets of my life and from my lived experience. And I try to use those in the way that I process information. And so I rely on things like physics. I think that physics and ecology really matter when we're looking at fantasy football, because the lens of fantasy football right now, I think what we're really good at is providing buy, sell, ADP type information. No shade at all to Ryan McDowell. He is a right down the middle dynasty analyst. He's almost like a journalist in the dynasty space or the fantasy space, where he is reporting on the tenor of the market. And we're really good at that. We're really good at bringing economists into the conversation. Scott Connor, I think, is a really good economist in the fantasy space. However, where we're not so great is diverging from that very large pool of analysts who do that type of thing. And the way that I make content hopefully resonates with people who are thinking different or are just slightly different than the normal fantasy player. The folks who aren't just trying to beat their family or their coworkers, like in one league, the people who are trying to incorporate unregulated market dynamics, who are thinking about physics or the things that draw from their lived experience that they can then push into the way that they play Dynasty in like a very philosophical meta way. And I think that's really cool. And that's something that we honestly need a lot more of.
That's really beautiful. I love the way that you broke that down. And more importantly, I almost love the analogous relationships you had with some of the other content creators in the space and kind of how they live within it, because I think you're 100% right. That is their relationship. And we are consumers that need that type of feedback to how we can drive our decision making. But to an even more exasperated point that I think both yourself and the Superflex dude, John Hogue, do, as well as us on a weekly basis, is really drive into other ways in which you can combat strategy that where, the standard churnings that you're constantly getting from the content that you're continuing to ingest, like that's great, but how do you diversify your own self to make sure that it isn't just the same old smack that you're seeing week in and week out from everyone else? And I don't mean from a content perspective. I mean you as someone who's engaging in the actual game itself. How do you diversify? And it's really funny because like I probably go to the extreme level, right, Tommy? Like I constantly talk about how I'm trying to change myself in every single league. Like I'm a chameleon. That's not what I want anyone else to do, because I don't think it's going to be something that can be done by everyone else, right? Like you have 30 plus leagues, you're a portfolio player, good grief. Like I would never tell you to do that. Smaller, smaller window for me is definitely significantly better. And all of that to say, like, I do think that Billy, Uriah, and myself, like when we are constantly talking about what we want to engage with, it really is what's happening in our own listener leagues. Like I almost see us as being similar to Russ in the regard of like, instead of us interacting specifically with Trade Addict's trades all the time, instead we're interacting with the actual maneuvers that happen within the leagues themselves to drive the conversation. I'm not saying that one is right or one is wrong. It's just a different way to actually perceive the things that are happening within the leagues. And yet it's still really helpful content for a lot of people that are engaging, because you can now take those individual circumstances. Yes, each micro market lives in its own bubble, but you can take that and now apply it to whatever you're actually experiencing yourself.
Yeah, that's great stuff from both of you. I think you guys said most of it, considering, I do think we think similarly in terms of like how we create content or why we create content, the reason we do. But I do think, to put it in short order here, like I do think what we're trying to do is think in a critical and creative way, right? Like it's just a little bit different than, the normal kind of mainstream flow of content that, you're seeing out there. And like and again, it comes from a genuine place, because literally like we'll be talking about this stuff on the side in the Discord. It's just thoughts that come through my head before I go to bed. Which is crazy to say, but nonetheless, that's it's just genuinely what we kind of think of, and that's how we think of the game, because I do believe that each of us has come into this game probably a few years after it really kind of got going, and we're like, how can we navigate these markets and actually make an impact or have an impact? And it's not going to be that same way that all these other great analysts are coming up with. We have to think outside the box a little bit, and that's kind of the point here. Before we get going, go hop in, Tommy.
I want to give the listeners some flowers because I did just trash them a little bit.
I don't think you did that, but yeah, sure. Hop in, give them some flowers, do it.
So here's the thing is, once you start creating content, like, not to stroke our egos that much, but like once you start creating content that you're really passionate about that does diverge from the norm, I've found, at least in my experience, that the listeners follow and then they add the fuel to the fire. Right? Like you get the people who think the way that you think in these discords, on social media, in DMs, and they layer on so much context and all of these other facets of this thing that you've looked at from your perspective. And all of a sudden you're thinking about Dynasty differently. And so it's like the listeners create the momentum. You're sort of the starting point, but the journey of whatever the experience is of these shows is really fueled by the listeners, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the community that we each have built, obviously, between Superflex, Super Show, Dynasty, Underdog, like the amount that we've learned from the people, like some of the sharpest people are in these discords. You know what I mean? As sharper, if not sharper than us, for sure. And it's you learn so much from, for sure. Then, especially me, but but absolutely, like the people that we have met through the Discord have really enhanced our experience by so much and added so much content to the show, with data, with different, like so many different things, you know what I mean? Just conversations and everything. So I totally second that. Anything else on that, Jake, before I kind of have a follow-up on this, but I'd hop into you of something.
Yeah. I just wanted to have a follow-up question, especially because Tommy, just dogged all the listeners who are currently watching this live stream. So I did want to follow up with that and kind of ask, like, the actual process of content creating, is it technically a selfish endeavor, or is it selfless to let loose some of your inner workings? And when I say selfish, so much of what we're doing in its own right, especially for us, we have a lot of listener leagues. We're interacting with a lot of people who are in the comments. We are interacting with the people who are in our Discord. Are we intentionally trying to manipulate the people that we're interacting with in some way? And that's kind of the way that I sometimes see the way in which individuals interact with us. It's funny because I showed Billy a text message from a close friend of mine who reached out and was like, I was listening back to the show recently, and I was thinking to myself, every time that I receive a trade offer from Billy, I know for a fact that it has like no benefit to me, because he openly states on the show, I am going to win every single trade that I make. Not verbatim.
That's exactly how I said
it. Not verbatim, but that was the general premise that the friend was getting at. And I was like, you know what? That's a really valid discussion point that you're bringing up. And so I want to kind of press it on to you. Like, what are your intentions? Are they selfish? Are they selfless? Like, are you trying to benefit others? Are you just letting out your own inner thoughts and being like, this is what I want to talk about, so I'm going to talk about it?
Yeah, friends with flamethrowers. Excuse me. That's a brutal text to hear. Sorry, Billy.
It wasn't even that, because I know what I meant and what I said, and like I obviously could be taken that way, but I don't mind, because I was just being genuine and saying how I approach the game. But yes, please hop in, Tommy.
Totally. No, the person I maybe most admire in all of fantasy football in terms of the analyst is Sigmund Bloom and his On the Couch episodes. That, in my opinion, is sort of the ideal of what fantasy football content is for me. So in my formative years, I was like 18 or 19. I moved out to Massachusetts from Alaska, and I was hanging out because my roommates were PhD philosophy students. And that was like the formative group that I hung out with when I was, in my late teens. And they taught me essentially the way that I wanted to think the rest of my life. Right. And I think that that's really cool. Manipulation sounds bad, and in a lot of ways it is, but there's all sorts of positive ways that we can manipulate the thought process of listeners. And I think by approaching in a non-judgmental way, in an honest way, saying, yes, I want to win every trade. Who doesn't want to win every trade they're a part of?
That's what I said.
That sounds pretty great.
Oh my God.
Is it selfish? I don't think so. I think that if you're to like wrap all of the Sigmund Bloom type content up together, it's an artistic expression of scientific principles. That's what psychology is. That's what philosophers do. That's what building scientists and energy managers do. They manipulate fundamental principles with some sort of guiding purpose. For me, in my real world, it's ethical sustainability. It's helping people through science. In fantasy football, yeah, I'm manipulating sort of these norms that we've established. I'm exploring to find new norms so that I can offer insights to listeners. Is that manipulative? Absolutely. Is it selfish? Maybe, like if you let your ego get away from you. But if you do it from a generous standpoint, I think there's a lot of good to be gained from it.
Yeah, that's a great answer to that question in terms of like the selfish nature of it. I think what we're actually trying to do here is impart what we think is wisdom of sorts, right? And so I definitely don't, I think by, just giving that knowledge that, that's the way I approach the game, is obviously putting myself at a disadvantage for the sake of giving somebody the knowledge, right? And so it definitely comes from just that's the genuine my genuine feelings. But here, let's stick on this for 1 second, and I'll actually throw in some of these other comments here, which are great. But you don't have to get the more valuable side to win the trade, and I think that's totally true. And so, like, just to clarify my point, since we're here, and this is actually, it's funny because like
he's just defending himself.
You went somewhere I actually wanted to go, but in a different way. It's just really funny. But what I meant though is that I'm not, or what I know that I was trying to say is that I'm not going to make a trade just to make a trade. I'm going to make a trade because it's going to better my team. Whether that looks like that to the other people or not, that's a different story. And also, I've many times failed in that effort, right? Like I've many times made a trade and it didn't work out. So the point is that like you're always trying to win a trade or gain value in a trade, right? It's not that you're trying to always get one over on other people, which definitely that is what it sounds like. This is why Billy is Whole Foods. This is a little bit of an inside joke, but yeah, compared to Costco, I'm definitely the more expensive store to shop at if you're coming for Dynasty assets. But real quick here, what up, gentlemen? Shout out Ricky. Tony the Tux appears. Yes, shout out. 3 top gentlemen. Thank you, D. And then Holy Tuxedo, Jake with the new setup. Love it. Love it. Everybody noticing the new digs, Jake. Vibing. All right, cool. Let's keep going. So actually one more thing I wanted to stick on with this is kind of on the same point, right? Like a little bit of, we're giving the advice out. We're giving our genuine thoughts out. Do you ever worry that like your league mates are going to use it against you, or it's going to be harder to navigate your leagues? Kind of like the text that Jake got. Does that ever kind of concern you, and how do you work around that?
Yeah, I'm mostly anonymous in my leagues. I've had people mention my name, FF Tommy V, in conversations, and I don't let them know that is who I am. You're doing the FF Tommy V thing, and the FF Tommy V thing, like, not just talk about myself in the third person. That felt weird. The thing I try to do is to push myself to the margins and to find opportunities to affect the way that my league mates play, which we're going to get into hopefully in just a little bit. That's an evergreen thing. It's not like buy Brian Robinson, which you should. Like he's a value. That's not what I do. And so if somebody wants to copy me, it's sort of like I'll just find a different avenue to have the same effect, hopefully, or at least that pursuit of that effect, If people want to do it, I think it's great. I think people acting differently in leagues makes them more dynamic. If everyone is trying to be efficient and gain value and look at KTC or DLF's ADP, like, cool, I guess. Like that's fun. But there is more out there on the horizon, Jake?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I've bought every single share of Tyler Algier so that Tommy can't get him. Like it's
There you go.
only like what else is going to happen now? I've already impacted every market. There's none for Tommy to go get Tyler Algier. And Billy does understand that reference in the Superflex Super Show Discord. Tommy had shouted out that he thinks that Tyler Algier could be a really great buy due to contractual issues, things that might pop up for 2026. And it could just be a really great situation to buy into something really, really cheap right now, which I think is honestly really great, actionable advice. But also at the same time, if Tommy's in a league with somebody else in that Discord, guess what? He just, undermined his own value potentially in that situation.
Hold on, because I am in a league with a listener. I bought Tyler Algier and then I sold him for Michael Pittman. So like this works both ways too. I found a natural trade partner. I needed a wide receiver.
That is, I think you definitely kind of manipulated that situation, but hey, fair enough. You know what? I think that that's a great time to transition. Let's talk about combating some strategy, because I think that's what you literally did. I think you presented some strategy out there. You've put in a thought process into someone's mind, and you might have manipulated it. So constantly talking about combating specific strategies, because that is what you do on a regular basis. And I really do appreciate it, because that is probably my favorite thing to listen to on a weekly basis. You guys should probably put out some more episodes per week, but I won't be selfish. Talk to us about a time you tried to combat a specific strategy, but you misread it and failed. And how did you alter your approach afterward?
I want to have a dynamic conversation about this. And I want to reframe it a little bit if we can. I'm going to take off this ridiculous top hat while I do that.
It's a great ad.
So
it frames your whole setup so much better, but it's fine.
Can you read the question one more time? I want to reframe that question a little bit.
Sure. So talk to us about a time you tried to combat a specific strategy, but misread it and failed. How did you alter your approach?
So when I call myself a Loki, because John, the Superflex dude, kind of dubbed me that. Loki is full of one thing, and that's mischief-led failure, right? Like he is not necessarily good at succeeding. He is great at causing mischief. He's the literal god or demigod of mischief. Failure is not really, success and failure is not really the aim here. I think of like traffic calming elements, like what city planners do. When there's like a 45-mile-an-hour speed zone, you're getting into a downtown and you want to slow the traffic down to like 15 or 25 miles an hour, right? So what do? They narrow roads, they build in medians, they put walkways in, they put paint on the roads, there's flower beds, there's bike racks. They put stuff to make people more aware of their surroundings, to confuse them, essentially, into slowing down, to create caution. That's what I want to do. I just want to put enough signals in front of my league mates that they're not entirely sure how to proceed with their strategy. I want to test not only the breadth, the width of how their strategy works, but the depth as well. So what happens if, let's say you're a QBX or someone who wants to have 5 quarterbacks? What happens if I put this factor in front of you? What happens if I take all the rookie picks? What happens if I'm trading elite quarterbacks to the other managers, but not to you? I want to see what it is that you do with a strategy once we identify what that is, not to necessarily make you fail, but to see how you react and to sort of have planned for those reactions. And a lot of times, I'm in leagues with good managers. They deftly sidestep these challenges, but that just tells me, okay, I don't need to do that. I can move on to the next thing, or I can test them again with a different profile. And so I don't really love the term failure when we come into strategies. I think there's sort of like iterative processes or revisions or optimizations or de-optimizations that we can sort of take into this process and make it evolve over time, because our league mates are also evolving. I mean, Billy, this is where I want to turn it to you, man. Like, you're a very strategic guy. I think you've put some of these roadblocks in front of people. Do you consider them failures if you don't get the intended effect? How forward thinking are you? Are you like creating multiple branches with these strategic processes?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'm thinking as far ahead as it seems like you all are, but I don't consider them failures necessarily. I kind of am doing the same thing. I'm testing, right? And I'm figuring out kind of where you're at. So for me, it's almost, what's the saying? Like, it however many times you try, it's not an actual failure, right? It's just you're figuring out ways not to do it, right? Or the ways not to do it. And that's kind of what it is for me, is I'm just, I'll take shots and I'll slowly kind of, wean back from there. If I want to actually make a move, or I just want to kind of, test your position, then at least I know where you're at now, right? I know that this is too far of a step. And if, maybe if I go back, if I'm not receiving any counters, then I know I've gone way too far. If I'm receiving some counters, then maybe I'm like, okay, there's somewhere to work with here, right? And so that's like a very simplistic way of thinking about it. But also just something you said just made me think about what we were talking about a little bit last week, which was positional distribution. And like, if you don't understand the different positional distributions in your league, you can't even really attack some of this stuff, right? And so part of it is understanding your league mates. Like part of it is like, we're testing our league mates technically. So we're trying to gauge, different facets of their game. But then also you need to have gone around your league to figure out what everybody's actually doing, right? And I think that's kind of a lost art in a way, a lot of the time. And it does take some time. We got the Dynasty historian here who will go back about 12 years on you and find your team from when you were a child and figure out what you were, what kind of strategy you implemented then to use on you now. But there's different levels to it for sure. But yeah, Jake, any thoughts there?
No, yeah. Yes. I don't know why I said no, but fantastic feedback there, Billy. I really do like it. And I do want to jump a little bit back to what Tommy had talked about. And I really do like the idea of reframing this question. And especially knowing your professional background, it makes a lot of sense why you went the path that you went, because I think you're 100% correct. It isn't necessarily a failure. And I think one of the most important things that we tend to kind of misstep or misunderstand within this space is what I like to believe is this weird ability to use comparisons. And when I think of the word strategy, it is so non-holistic. People think of the word strategy and they say to themselves, to your point before, the Tommy B strategy, that guy's doing the Tommy B strategy. Is he? Like, maybe there's some nuance to it that overlaps to what Tommy would do in and using that strategy. But in reality, the effectiveness or the efficiency of that strategy might be very far off the quote unquote Tommy B strategy. And I think for so much of what we see on a day-to-day basis within the fantasy football community, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, I do apologize because I talk about it all the time. It really reminds me a lot of player comps, right? You're comping strategies to things when there's so much nuance behind the individual manager. And we don't really understand what it means to quote unquote combat or interact with a specific strategy, because that individual owner or manager is going to be doing significantly different things that are significantly more nuanced than just the overarching strategy as a whole. Because no one should fit into a singular bucket and say to themselves, I'm going to do exactly what Tommy says on a week-to-week basis from a strategy perspective. And if they did, I would actually be really intrigued to hear or see what that sounds like at the end of, a multiple season perspective. Like, I think that would be a really cool thought experiment. If anyone out there would love to just take on Tommy B and see what he does and speaks about on a weekly basis, this could be a great opportunity for you to really test the theory, because it's impossible from a quote unquote strategy perspective to just go hand in hand with it and understand what all of those micro maneuvers look like without really seeing it done by that specific person, if you know what I mean. And go ahead.
To add, so did you guys ever read not Hunger Games, Ender's Game?
No.
I don't know if I read it. I don't think I read it. Is that not a movie too?
I think it's like a young adult.
I feel like I watched that movie.
Yeah. But there's this little genius boy, and to paraphrase him, he essentially says, like, he learns to love his enemies. And once he truly loves them, then he defeats them. I think a lot of the challenge with taking on strategies is people assume that they're bad or wrong or not as good. They're all good. Every strategy works in the right context. Every strategy works if you've got the right manager at the helm, regardless of scoring settings or format or anything like that. You can manipulate almost any of these strategies to be highly successful. I think what people do is they lock in on something and they decide that is the optimal way to play. Whereas instead, they should be learning to love what their opponents are doing. And by loving them, understand them in a non-judgmental way. That's what love is, right? Like learn to love what they are, and then you destroy them once you understand them fully, you know?
And then you crush them. Yes.
This goes back to my question earlier today about how do you incorporate fantasy football into parenting? This is exactly what I was talking about. You answered incorrectly before, Tommy. That's all I'm going to say. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, that is incredible. I love that. Billy, sorry, were you about to say something?
No, I mean, just a couple of quick things. I do think, as we're talking about other people listening to the strategies or the advice, I don't think you can necessarily, like Jake's saying, take it one-to-one. I do think you have to be a little bit creative and make it your own. And once you do that, once you start like really, incorporating the different kind of factors and advice and all those things to your own strategies, that's when it really starts hitting and you can really own it and you can really try to like, direct it in a real way, I think. And also to your guys' point, every league environment is totally different, like, and deserves a different reaction or a different strategy or a different build, right? Like you can't go into every league going, I'm going to go QBX. Like it's just not going to work. Like, especially if somebody's, doing a similar thing. So you got to definitely, I think, break out of the box a little bit, even if it's something you wanted to do. Sometimes you can't do that. And here, just some proof that the listeners are sharper than me. Billy attempting to quote Thomas Edison. Yes, I was. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. We'll get there, right? We'll get there for sure. I guess we're on this topic. We have a question that's kind of in line with what we're talking about. Are people lacking incorporating player comps to effectively execute their respective strategies? I don't really think so. I mean, I'll throw this to you guys. I don't really think that's that we're lacking incorporating player comps necessarily. I think that's actually something we may do far too often. I don't know. What do you guys think? Throw it to Tommy first there.
I'll leave it I like to use profile comps. I'm not smart enough to do player comps. I've watched the NFL for over 30 years and I still haven't figured out how to do a player comp. And so I don't try to. I lean on smarter people to do those things. And I do what I can do best. And a lot of that is taking names away and looking at Dynasty assets sort of outside of the physical universe and create a different set of physical circumstances that they have to occupy. Because ultimately, yes, we all love the NFL. Like that's how we started playing fantasy football. Like 90+% of us is we like watching football. But we're not playing anywhere near the same game. It's entirely like fundamentally different. And so comping one player to another is almost unfair to that player, in my opinion. It doesn't reflect what it is that our goals are, nor the player's goals. And sort of meeting in the middle, there's a disconnect that I can't overcome. But Jake, I'm curious what you think, man. Like, where do you layer in player comps?
I don't. I really don't. I try my very best to detract myself completely from player comps as a whole. I do think that one of the biggest things that will end up, throwing the bag away from a lot of the experiences that we have is by using other people's work to help drive us to the conclusions that we think we want to get to. And so much of the player comp experience is through someone else's lens. I can see the same blue sky as 16 other people. And of that 16, we might all describe it differently. And I think that's the reality of how we see sports. I think that's the reality of how we see art. And in a way, a lot of what we see within the professional sports world is a form of art where each individual artist is performing a completely different melody at a completely different pitch. And yet it all kind of looks the same to one of us, and then to somebody else, it's not. And so for me, I really want to stay away from that space as a whole because it just doesn't do a lot for me. Now, with that all being said, I do think that it has a lot of additional value to the way in which we do play. Like when we think of the way in which individuals are communicating through content, through podcasts, through Twitter, through whatever it might be, or sorry, Blue Sky as well. Always shout out Blue Sky. We need to make sure that we're conscientious of how that impacts our league mates. Like it's very, very apparent to me that we know that everybody we're playing with to some level is interacting with that. And so when, someone out there, and shout out to Matt Waldman, he was just on the show, but when Matt throws out a player comparison within his RSP, that is incredibly positive, to a place where I don't think it might go, I sure as heck will take advantage of that. I'm not going to overdraft or overconsume a specific profile, but I happily will take on a profile and send it somewhere else at the right time, because there's so many off ramps during the off season before, specifically for rookies during the off season. So those are types of situations where I will allow player comps to then effectively execute a respective strategy, but I will never use a player comp to then drive my own value for a specific player.
Love it. Great stuff. All right, let's keep it moving. Still with some strategic combat. Have you attempted, Tommy, this is for you. Have you attempted a build or a strategy that you inherently believed wouldn't succeed for the sake of testing your own biases? If so, how did it pan out? And when did you decide to make alterations towards like normalcy or a different strategy?
I love the question. I got totally distracted by CF Gordo in the comments section asking if I was a mayor. I kind of feel like the Paw Patrol mayor right now.
The Paw Patrol mayor, that's so good. Yeah, oh my God.
I feel like I'm dressed like a villain.
YouTube comments are always just so killer, man. You guys crush it. Oh
I promise I was paying attention though, Billy. So the question, if I
you want the question
right,
again, or are you good?
Is do I build strategies that I don't inherently believe in to sort of test the waters and see, like, I think that this is wrong. Should I do this and try it out and sort of get the results? If you're going to be a portfolio player in any sense, my biggest recommendation is to be a portfolio player of strategies, right? Not necessarily like you can buy the wide receiver 36 here and sell them there, or you can buy the wide receiver 38 and you can sell the wide receiver 34. Like that's all well and good. I think that's a little bit figured out or solved by now. Where you should be diversifying is in your strategies. I'm not necessarily rigid in my approach to every single league. One strategy that I did not necessarily love to do was the 2 elite quarterback build with nothing behind it. And so I tried it out last year. And I had a lot of regular season success, like a lot of regular season success. My teams were deeper than they traditionally are when I have 4 or 5 elite quarterbacks. However, when I got to the playoffs, when I was playing the really good teams, in subsequent weeks, my win rate was lower. And I don't know if it was just small sample size, but my teams that had 4 or 5 elite QBs, they were my championship teams this year. And so what I told myself is I'm going to start inching closer to that type of build if I can. And so I've moved to 3 and 4 elite quarterbacks in those builds. I'm still comfortable because the regular season success is a larger sample size. It's really the bigger goal is to get a bye week, right? To win enough games in the regular season to get that bye week. I think Koopa over at South Harmon does really good work in terms of like studying the odds over literal like hundreds of thousands of leagues. And his takeaway, which is reinforced by other smart people like Jordan McNamara, is get a 1st or 2nd seed, get the bye, make a lot of money. The 2 elite quarterback build got me there. It just didn't get me to the finish line. And so those teams where I can't get the 3rd and 4th elite quarterbacks, I'm not changing anything. I'm just going to keep riding it until the market changes in those leagues, even if it is uncomfortable for me. Did that answer the question?
It did.
Yeah,
okay.
I think it did. Yeah. And I do think it's like okay to be in an uncomfortable place sometimes, right? With your builds, like you don't have to be in that perfect place, and you can be patient with it. Like I do feel like I have a couple builds where I'm not where I wanted to be. I took a strategy that didn't quite work out, that I didn't like. And now I'm like, all right, I got to work my way back to, we call it normalcy or some other strategy, right? And it's taking time. Like it's not like I can just spin the wheels and boom, I'm now on to, I have the assets I want to kind of go churn this team around. Like you got to be kind of patient with it and understand that like you don't need to, fall back into the same strategy or whatever just because it's easy to do that way and you feel good about it. It's like sometimes it's going to take the better part of a year to work the windows and get to that next, that next place, that next strategy that you're trying to kind of alter or move on from. Any thoughts there, Jake?
No, I think you hit it there to close out the thought, and I just want to really reiterate that. I think so much of what we do, especially the three of us, when we think about communicating strategy, I don't think we talk enough about how elongated that process is, right? Like when we communicate words, it's so it's so efficient sometimes, unfortunately, to a fault. We talk about this experience that happens over many months, potentially over many years to get to the most efficient part of where we want to be. And yet it's accumulated in or summarized in a 3 to 5 minute blurb on a given week if we're feeling up to it, right? And that doesn't do it justice. That doesn't do the strategy, the process, whatever it might be, the planning, the actual operation of it enough. And so I just really want to hone in on the fact that so much of the nuance that even Tommy is talking about here has a lot to do with time. Like the only way to get to these conclusions is through time. And I find that a lot of newer players, especially when they reach out to me specifically, and I try and be as helpful as I can, like there's this idea of wanting to get to this utopian state as fast as possible. Like I'm going to be able to do it in 6 months, or I just have my startup. How do I get my builds there now? It's like, you can't, and you shouldn't. And that shouldn't be where you want to be. Like you need to understand that there's this involvement of multiple steps to get to where you want to be. And you need to understand what the illustration looks like to get there. And so, Billy and I don't remember what it was. I think it was last offseason. We talked a little bit about project managing your team. And I don't want to get too much into the steps of that again, but like very much to the same regard, if you don't understand the entire scope of the plan from the onset, you'll never get to the conclusion that you want to. And, that isn't me trying to dig into the work that we're doing. It's just the reality of these types of episodes. We don't have the opportunity to talk through the entire strategy from start to finish, where someone else who might not be privy to understanding every single term that we're saying can dissect it and understand it and chew on it and then spit it out themselves over the next 18 months efficiently. And I understand that. But so much of what I want to try and present to the rest of the people who are listening to us is the idea that the strategy itself doesn't need to solidify itself within a 6-month window or a 12-month window. It really is about driving yourself towards that end goal that you think exists and trying to get ever closer to there. And like Tommy said, having 5 elite quarterbacks was at one point the goal, but now knowing that it might not necessarily be as efficient or might not necessarily win as many leagues, where he might have maybe additional depth or adding other elite assets to a starting lineup that might be able to propel him into more winning situations, might be the best way. And you only get there through multiple iterations, going through this over and over and over again.
Yeah. Can you throw up Boja's question real quick?
Which one? About I was actually going to throw up one of his, but this one?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, go for it.
Yeah. So the question is, why were my 2 elite QB builds not doing as well as the 5 elite QB builds? Well, if you think about it, the elite quarterbacks tend to belong on the good teams, right? And so I think I was lessening the competition of those playoff leagues where I had all the good quarterbacks. And so I wasn't coming up against a strong team. And so I was winning more just because I had that one advantage. Yes, I was picking matchups, and I think that matters quite a bit, even at the very elite tier, because it is super predictable, or more predictable than the other positions. Whereas I was holding serve with the 2 elite quarterbacks against the other teams in those latter builds. And so that's what I want to do, is start to just pull away from my competitors and build an advantage where we were on even ground before.
Yeah, that's great stuff. I think you can do that, especially with like QB and tight end, where they're kind of top heavy. And if you stack up in those positions, then you create that advantage Tommy's talking about, which is awesome when you run into it and you start seeing it in practice. You're like, oh, wow, this is very effective. So yeah, definitely recommend that. I did want to go back to one of the other questions Big Boy had here. When you're in win mode, do you go all in and sell future picks, all of them? If not, why? Isn't the goal winning? I do think I'll let you guys hop in here, but I do think to some extent, yeah, there is some truth to like, moving some of your future assets to win. But I think like when you do it is key. Number one, to make sure that you're not doing it for no reason. Like if you're doing it now, I've got myself into trouble by doing that. I did that actually last year in a league, and I not only screwed myself for that year, but also for probably subsequent years as well. And so I would really caution selling picks right now. I think, if you're certain that your pick is going to be late and you can minimize the amount of them or how many years away you're giving them, like just wait till you get towards the playoffs or in the playoffs, preferably, and then start considering doing it. But man, I just have got myself into some trouble where all of a sudden my team sucks and like I traded all my picks away, and you just couldn't really foresee that because fantasy is kind of crazy. So yeah, any thoughts on that, Tommy?
So many thoughts. It's a great question, because you have to think about what the picks represent to you. Like there's some sort of like liquid collateral that's been talked a million times over, but really, what are you doing with the picks? What are you converting them into? I would say if you're converting them into stacked advantages, where let's say if you have Justin Jefferson, you go get Jamar Chase, or if you've got Josh Allen, you get Lamar Jackson. If you're stacking that collateral on top of already winning bets and bets that are probably going to be a little bit future-proofed, I have no problem rebuilding in the middle, contending, trading those future firsts. I probably do it at times to a fault. And then if you're going to do things like I do, where you have these really asymmetrical builds, where like I've only got like 4 wide receivers and I have to start 3 every week, like not even including the flexes. Well, if you lose 2 of your wide receivers, what's your game plan? So if you've held on to your first and you've got Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, but those 2 receivers go down, well, all of a sudden you might be a shoo-in for the 101. Right? Having that asymmetrical build, that really lean build on one side and pushing a lot of value to another position. And so you either need to change your roster construction and have a plan for that pre-thought out, because you don't want to be reacting in real time. You want to already have a plan for when the worst case scenario happens if you have no future draft capital. Otherwise, you're going to be in a really tough spot, and people are going to start to take advantage of really your moves, your panic.
Any thoughts, Jake, before we keep it moving?
Thoughtless.
Thoughtless. Beautiful. All right. Just want to say, Ricky, good observation here. Takes top hat off to then talk about being low key. Yes, just removing the disguise. I love it. Very well done. Very well done. All right, so let's keep it moving here. We're gonna continue talking a little bit about league dynamics. So, table talk. This actually came up in a league. I can provide, it comes up in every league, I feel like, or many leagues, but I can provide certainly some context around this. But when I say table talk, I mean, like open discussions about trade values. And I don't mean ongoing trade negotiations. I think that's a well-known faux pas. You don't really talk about ongoing trade negotiations in the chat, but open discussions about trades, values, kind of like after they happen, or just values in general in your dynasty leagues. Just to give some context why this came up to me. We have this really big dynasty league, 36 people in it, 3 copies of a player. When you get down to it, it's not as crazy as it seems, but a lot of people in there, and, trades happen. There's 3 copies of a player. So inevitably some people are going to see a trade go down and be like, yo, that's the value. I would never have sold him for that. Or I would, whatever it is, those kind of conversations end up kind of flowing. But I think this happens in all sorts of leagues. It happens in our listener leagues too. Trades go down and people have thoughts. So, I just kind of wonder what your thoughts on this, because obviously when we think about the 36 team league where there are 3 copies, talking about things can give you an opportunity to kind of reset values. And I do think that there's a similar kind of, effect, or there's a similar factor like that happening in regular leagues that don't have 3 copies too. But what are your thoughts on table talk? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you engage in it? Like, does it matter?
Aside from deals actually getting done, trade negotiations, especially trade valuations in a public forum, whether or not you're part of it or if you're just talking about them, tend to cause the most friction and to pull out some of the worst components of league mates. I try to stay away from ever talking about the value of a player. I try to never actually have dialogue anymore. This is something that I've sort of changed over the past 12 months. I don't want to talk to you about the deal that we're doing. I know that sounds counterproductive, but if
You're
it's
like Uriah now.
yeah, if it's all
No discussions.
actionability, like I get a ton of deals done, like send the offer. And that's the information that I'm going to give you. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not trying to be secretive. I have just found that people get upset if you talk to them in that like very vulnerable time. I don't want to encourage that. I love talking to my league mates about things that are going on in life, about their life, like holidays. Hope you're having a great Memorial Day. Sixers in the Trade Addicts chat. Like that stuff is awesome. I really enjoy that. Why would I want to taint my experience with, bad faith conversations essentially? Because you're just trying to get one over on me, and I would just be trying to get one over on you when it comes down to it. Like I have a motivation just like you, Billy, of like winning a trade, and I don't imagine my league mates have a different motivation. And so that just leads to like, I don't know, less pleasant interactions. Jake, how do you like soften that? Like walk me through this. That way I can re-engage with my league mates with trade negotiations.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful question. Thank you for presenting it to me, because I think I actually lack all ability to soften blows for people. I think if anything, I am the like turn the knife in the stomach, like I will make you feel even worse than you already felt before type of individual. And I don't know why I'm like that. I think it's this like terrible vindictive nature of my parents that like I grew up with, and I just naturally got it. But I really am of the belief that it's like if you almost like bring this pain upon yourself, you have begat that. Like you now deserve that. And more often than not, in a public forum, I usually am pretty PC, for lack of better words. Like I will happily interact with my league mates in a very, very common and peaceful approach. Now, what will end up happening is when these types of conversations, to your point, get brought out to the public, where your valuations are now being discredited, that isn't really a place that I end up excelling in. And I know it's somewhere where I probably need to ease off the gas and step away from the situation. And I think for all of that, I found that levity is usually the best way to work through it. That's definitely something that I've really tried my best to kind of wane towards instead of wane away from. So much of what I now do is just try and engage individuals with humor. And I've noticed that is how I end up working in work. Like I've noticed that in high conflict situations in a work environment, I will happily try and disengage others through humor. And I find that it's very successful as long as you can do it in a professional manner. And I think much of what we do from like a human interaction standpoint on a day-to-day, I'm talking to you human to human, is so coarse. It's so harsh because we want to get the results that we want out of that person. And I think that the best way to get there more often than not is actually to remove that veil, that harshness that the person feels that they need to get to where they want to be, whatever that end result is. And we end up getting to a better place much faster if that's gone, because now we can work together. And so that's what I typically do in trade negotiations now, in public interactions. I talked about a little bit about my social experiment with regards to like how I want to engage my different league mates. I can openly tell you, don't be an asshole. It doesn't get you trades done. Wow, what a surprise. It works for a very short window, but the bully never wins. Okay, maybe that's not necessarily true, but that's how it felt. And I think that that's definitely some of what I've kind of taken away, is like really trying to engage individuals as humans and just remove a lot of the tension through levity, because much of what we aren't understanding is that there's so many other factors involved into fantasy football that actually have nothing to do with fantasy football. That individual's personal life, whether it's politics, whether it's their family members, whether it's whatever it might be, is constantly engaging them to then drive them to do whatever they're doing. Because so much of the fantasy space is impulsive. You pick up your phone now and you can send out 50 trades in 12 minutes, literally. Like Sleeper makes it so easy. On MFL, not as fast, but almost as mentally responsive. It's okay. And like, I think that is the reality that we have to work with, is that we are so stimulated with this game that we almost need to destimulate to then re-stimulate, as stupid as that sounds.
Yeah, it's great stuff from both of you. I do think, you know, for me, definitely trying to break the ice a little bit with like humor, or not a little bit, always, especially as a commish. A lot of these leagues I commission, and so definitely going to be way more reserved in there. But often when we see a crazy deal, especially with the listener leagues, I think there's an element of reading the room too. Like if you know that everybody's a vibe, you can kind of, you know, joke with each other when a trade gets done, knowing that something impacted that trade or kicked it off or was the catalyst for it. You can, you know, joke with people. And so there's definitely an element of reading the room for sure. Definitely can get too carried away with that stuff if you're talking in the league chat. So definitely have to be careful with it. And I do agree, just kind of, I mean, the best strategy is to not say anything most of the time. But I do think if you have, you know, a league where you can do that stuff, there's opportunity to kind of, you know, a big trade gets done. And we have a comment right here, actually. So like, feel like here, Ricky S. in the YouTube comments, feel like setting the trade market for elite assets in the league isn't talked about enough. Right. And obviously, you know, somebody might feel a certain type of way about it, but if you can talk about that in the league chat, you can kind of, you know, I think impact the values of other assets, right? Based on whatever that trade was that got done, depending on how the conversation is, you know, presented. But I think there's an opportunity for those kind of things. And just understanding that when trades get done like that, it does reset the market. So even if it's not talked about, it is a good point. That's a huge part of the league dynamics that you need to keep your eye on. Real quick here before we move to the next question here, if you hit negative warp 10, you turn into a giant salamander and inevitably sire a batch of lizard children with your commish. Gordo absolutely crushing it in the comments tonight, dude. Oh my goodness, hilarious. All right, we're keeping with the same trend here, kind of the table talk discussion a little bit, but you know, we're amongst friends. We constantly have differing opinions. Like, how do you engage a friend in the community when a public approach, strategy, prospect, profile, etc., valuation, whatever, is misaligned? Do you try to right the ship or pass it off and let it dissolve into the ether? This is a super interesting conversation. I think that Jake might try to do this a little bit more than I do. But like, yeah, how do you approach? Well, like I kind of let people just kind of do their things is my point. I think sometimes you try to maybe, you know, engage, push along, help, or whatever it is. Tommy, do you engage in that kind of at all? And like, how do you navigate that if you do?
Not even a little bit. And it's not because of my league mates or my leagues. It's the fact that we have two really great Discords. We have the Dynasty Underdog Discord and we have the Super Friends. That is the point where I learn and I grow and I offer advice and I nudge people in directions because it's non-judgmental. We're helping each other. And I really enjoy that experience. Like, I've been an educator for like a decade now. I teach at a community college and I love that component of my life. This is a furtherance of that, or it's just a different facet of that where I get to learn and grow from people and I get to offer insights from my perspective. And it's a really healthy, like vibrant, fun thing to do. I don't do that at all with my league mates or with other analysts or anything like that because they know what they're doing. They've got their own trajectory and their own biases. Why am I going to change those, you know?
Yeah, that's actually, I'm going to throw it to you, Jake, for sure. But I think that's an interesting response. Like I do agree. Obviously, we're all trying to, again, we talked about this, impart the knowledge as part of the content, like it's part of what we're trying to do. So at a like public level in the Discord, for sure, that always trying to push people in the right direction, give them advice anytime they ask. But I have found that when I go on the side and if I've tried to, you know, say like, hey, like maybe this is not the direction. Sometimes there's some offense taken. You know what I mean? And like you don't know what you're doing, and like I should be like I'm looking down on you in some kind of way. So I definitely never want to make people feel that way. I want them to be able to come to the Discord and like in an open forum and be able to just ask their questions and feel comfortable. So I do think that's where I kind of, you know, that's where I get, you know, the advice off rather than trying to, you know, go to the side and maybe piss somebody off. Jake, any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, this is my question. This is based off of my own life experiences. Yes, I have a problem. Yes, I talk to others the way I shouldn't sometimes. Yes, my parents allowed me to say that because I was an only child. Yes, I know that I need to improve upon this. All of that to say,
Underdog under the hood for sure.
oh man, holy shit, Billy. Way to fucking out me, man. Okay, yes, I do this. And it is a problem. So much of my existence, I do find that I, for some reason, take like borderline underlying offense to others not doing things efficiently or well. And I have
It's
always
amazing.
kind of been someone who will try and help others in what I think is the right approach, or maybe even just trying to revisualize something. Like, I don't even necessarily think that I'm trying to have them do something that I would do. It's more so like trying to pose, almost to Tommy's point at the start of the show, right? Like when you repurposed a question that I had written, I think you had done a beautiful job with that, because I think that that was a really intelligent way to move through it. And when I have those conversations with others, I'm not trying to say, hey, the thing you're doing is bad. The thing I'm trying to really go at is, there are other ways to go about this in which I think you're doing it very, for lack of better words, narrow mindedly. Like, you aren't bringing in enough factors in your decision making to drive yourself to the conclusion that you're making. And so, yes, I have engaged both friends, complete strangers, in ways in which they probably were very uncomfortable by. And I have now decided, in my very long 33 years, that, you know what, maybe it's better for me to not have those conversations with people, right? Like, I think it's better for them to learn those things by themselves, use the resources that, you know, I have potentially provided them in the past, and use that as kind of the, hey, that was the resource, that was the conversation, no need to go to part deux for them, right? Like, they don't need that part of their lives. They're not looking for the trilogy of this, you know, multiple part series of Jake trying to write their own ship. I need to improve upon that. And I know that. And I currently am, I promise. But it is something that I know is a weakness of mine.
I love that we could, you know, put you on the couch here and have a discussion and go through some therapy. What the thing is, I think it comes from a really good place, and people should accept it more, to be honest with you. So I do think it might be more on the other person than it is on you, because you're trying to do something good, even though maybe you do it in an offensive way sometimes. But I think it comes from a really good place, and obviously there's no harm meant. But it's an interesting discussion, because again, like we get all of our friends into these leagues. Like, Jake's one of my best friends from growing up. Another one of my friends, Matt, for example. I really would hesitate to reach out and be like, you should do this, because I know he would take offense to it. You know what I mean? And that's my friend, you know what I mean? But you want to, like, you're like, I really want to just like help you and guide you. But like, at some level, you have to let people make their own mistakes. For me, even myself, like, I'm this way just in life. No matter what it is, like, I need to come to the conclusion myself, even if I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing. And somebody else, like my wife, would be like, you got to change this. And I'm like, whatever. And then finally I come to the decision myself months later, and I'm like, yeah, you were absolutely right. I should have done that. But you need to experience it for yourself. And I think that that's kind of how it is in Dynasty. You kind of got to go through the mechanics of like messing up sometimes to actually be successful. So it's definitely part of it.
Here's what you got to do if you want to get them to start to buy in, is you have to, we do this in energy management all the time. You have to give them the easy wins. Do this one move. I have a friend who was new to Dynasty. I told him to pick up Dontavian Wicks, great pickup when he was a rookie, and Amon-Ra St. Brown when he was a rookie. He listens to me now. If you give them easy wins, they're more likely to be open to the conversation. When you give them the theory that they should only roster 3 wide receivers and 25 running backs, that might be a step too far, you know?
I think that's a really, really good feedback, and something I definitely need to be more conscientious of. And I think it's actually really helpful. I promise this won't be long. My past work experience, I was a referee professionally. And so much of that work is like you're constantly being critiqued, like through the natural process of gaining the different levels of certification through the United States Soccer Association and USSF through the federation. Is like you are constantly being critiqued, no matter what you're doing. Like me walking up to the field in my button down and slacks, if my shirt was, one button too much, I got dinged, right? Like if my shoes weren't properly polished, I got dinged. If my hair wasn't swooped perfectly, I got dinged. And it was like, being so conscientious of everything that you're doing really made me overly conscientious of what everyone else was doing. Cause I was like, if I'm getting dinged for this, what's going on with that guy over there or that gal over there? Please, like give it to me. Like I need to understand what is going on. And I think like the biggest thing for me is just really getting through the reality that like so much of that experience was borderline traumatic. Like that isn't someone else's experience that they have to go through. And so just because I went through it doesn't mean that I have to embark on my own level of what I think I'm knowledgeable about now and apply that to somebody else. And so to your point, Tommy, I really do think it is about the small wins. Like I really do think as well, it's about reinforcing their own small wins, the things that they do by themselves. All right. Like too much of the process is always about what you're not doing correctly, and not enough of it is about what you're doing, throughout the way in which you're working. And by all means, it's a me problem. That's how I'll take the solace of this beautiful, what is it, table talk? It's really turned into Jake crying about himself talk, but yeah, we're good.
I think that was really good advice though, Tommy, about the small wins, because I do think that is a way you can at least, start getting to the people you want to, and, talking to them on the side and not kind of, offending them. But let's hit some of these comments. They're absolutely killing me. Lord of the Rings-esque explanations. Absolutely. Lapisaurus, is this why you only respond to me in GIFs now, Jake?
Literally.
I promise I won't be long is a hell of a pickup line. Gordo, just telling you, man, you're amazing. Ricky S, you were a pro ref. Love that. Yeah, he said I ref soccer club too. That's sick. Hell yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And hair swooping to the wrong side. Yellow card. Yo, that's such a good comment. Oh my god. Y'all are crushing it. So funny, man. Holy shit. All right. Let's hop into this next one. We're moving on from table talk. It was a great discussion. I appreciate it. I may even have had some more shit to say, but now I forgot about it. So we're gonna move on anyway. Dynasty Rorschach test. I want to pop this up. I actually have it for the people watching. We can pop up this dizzying graph that Tommy sent to the DU Discord, I think to hypnotize us. I'm not sure what the reason was, but I wanted to know, what you actually gleaned from this chart, because you sent it to us to kind of ask us what we all thought of it. We gave some thoughts, and just to for the listeners, it's showing KTC values over time, year by year, for drafted QBs. So yeah, let Tommy go ahead, and if you want to add more context. But yeah, I just wanted to see what kind of your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I'm doing a physics study. I'm trying to define the non-physical, physical world of Dynasty assets and their trajectories, and what is a propulsory effect, what is increasing drag, what the natural endpoint is for these different profiles. And so I'm like getting really far in the weeds. And while KTC isn't perfect, it captures some market sentiment, some market efficiencies, and diagnostic inefficiencies, I think. And I intentionally gave you a mess. This is every quarterback who has accrued any sort of KTC value since the inception of Keep Trade Cut, which was back in 2020, I believe. And I just charted them and said, hey, what do you think? And I prefaced it. I said, no wrong answers, no judgments. And I put it in our Discord as well. And we got a whole host of different answers, and they were all really intriguing. Do you guys want to offer any interpretations before I dig into some of the things that I'm seeing, or some of the process of how I'm viewing visualized data?
I mean, I just, initial thoughts were that there was a pretty poor QB class somewhere in here, and that kind of shows, in some of these dips in the chart. And then it just seems like something funky happened 2022, 2023 ish. Like really in 2023 is kind of where things go, but like between 2022 and 2024, I'm not exactly sure because I don't have the data, what it was, but those are kind of the things that just, stick out from a macro level. Any thoughts, Jake?
Yeah, kind of diving into that as well, understanding the fluctuation of specific lines and trying to better garner kind of when those individual peaks are truly peaks, and then seeing them almost like tail off to oblivion is really, really interesting, especially when you can then kind of typically you can kind of understand who that general quarterback is, given the key. So that was really how I was looking at it, of course, stupidly line by line instead of looking at the trends. But I think that helps me better understand some of the trends that I was also seeing. So yeah, Tommy, why don't you talk me through how I should have been looking at this data?
I don't know if there is
go.
a should, but there's a whole lot of information here. Not the little lines, they're there, but there's a lot of information around it. Let's start at 2020. Let's start at the beginning. So there are fewer lines, obviously. So we were charting fewer assets, fewer QBs, fewer overall assets. KTC was figuring out how they were going to chart and value players. And for those of you who are unaware, like, this is all user inputs. KTC didn't really do anything aside from give you 3 options: one keep, one trade, one cut, right? And then they, show you what the results of those things were. And so you can see sort of like a information gathering for most of the first year. And then they populated these databases with all of the assets theoretically. So by mid to late 2020, we've got all of the assets. We have a first attempt. And you see a lot of friction, a lot of ups and downs. There isn't a lot of blank space. So when I'm looking at visualized data, you're looking at what's there. You're also looking at what's not there, right? And so more vibration is more fluctuation in the market, more considering and reconsidering, more people putting those inputs into this platform, right? Like, it's growing. I would guess the number of votes in January of 2020 of these keep, trade, and cut decisions is very different than 2024. I would imagine more folks are coming to this site. And so we're getting sort of this unreliable data shaken up into like a snow globe, and then it's starting to settle into what we think these values might be. The other thing that I'm seeing is a story is being told, whether or not we understand what that story is. It's not necessarily up to us to be able to read French and Italian and German when we go to Europe. We can see from context clues what is going on with like a street sign or with a vendor, things like that, right? And so instead of trying to know everything on this chart, I think just let the information tell the story, and you plug in where you do understand it, and the rest of it you can leave alone. Because a lot of times folks look at data, they try to interpret data, and they don't fully understand it, or they don't understand it well enough to have an actionable takeaway that is actually beneficial to them. And so that's why I was asking y'all, like, what do you see? Because what you see, what you're willing to put out there in a Discord forum, is probably something that you're able to interpret and you're able to put some actionability behind. And so I'm going to pause there and ask what you guys see, because I see a couple circles on this chart.
Yeah, I think that was Gordo I think it was Gordo who put those circles.
I think it was NWO
Who
Joe.
was it? Was it? Okay, yeah, because I don't know if I meant to necessarily grab that exact picture, but I think what he was talking about was maybe the QBs tend to average a higher draft value early on, but not to get over our skis, and most values tend to fade over time. And I do think that you see that with a lot of these, the trend lines. Like, you see kind of some peaks, but over time they crash pretty hard on the whole, right? Like, obviously you see there's more white space at the top, of course, because there's going to be fewer assets up there. But I do think that you see that in this graph at a pretty stark level.
Jake?
Yeah, I think given the context, you really do start to better understand the vibratory assets, for lack of better words, through kind of the visual lens of the literal small and micro movements that happen to each of those assets across their way. And I think that's a really good read of it, Tommy, to just better understand one, the lens or the density of Dynasty Fantasy Football right now, right? Like, I don't think it's necessarily KTC is doing a phenomenal job marketing their product. I think it's really there's just more people playing this game than ever before, and they're probably putting in more inputs. I do also think that this is what is inherently wrong with KTC as well. Like, more inputs doesn't necessarily mean an actual representation of what the market should or shouldn't be doing on an asset. And so we'll see individual players through this lens have almost artificial dips because of the way in which people are misunderstanding or seeing individual player situations be impacted. I think a prime example when I was first looking through this was Justin Herbert being almost artificially impacted by John Harbaugh getting hired. You can visually see that. And it's just one of those situations where the narrative was very much a reality. And I think that ends up being, processed through the rest of the community. I'm not saying that it shouldn't occur that way, but I do think that it almost shows, I guess, the greater impact of, I guess, analysts and content creators on the greater market itself.
Yeah. A few takeaways that I had, and I'd love to, circle back to some of these. The point scoring, the total number of points scored hasn't really changed from 2020 to 2024, 2025 with quarterbacks. There have been, some surges at the very top. We had a year where it was like 3 or 4 quarterbacks averaged almost 25 points per game. I think that was 2022. And so we see an elevation of a few profiles to the top, but this is market sentiment. This has nothing to do with points. And so if you're looking at blank spots or you're looking at densities of these different colors, it's only telling part of the story. You have to overlay mentally what it is you're actually getting out of these assets, because it's pretty consistent year over year. The other things I'm seeing, I think Koopa brought this up, is the seasonal nature of when to buy and when to sell quarterbacks in general, much less in these sort of like elevated tiers. It seems like if you're going to buy an elite quarterback, January into February is about your buy window. And then there's a increase in value, a plateau, a stark increase at the beginning of the season, and then a plateau and a slight dip, but not a marked dip. And so if you're going to set the trajectory of your team, you should probably do it right around the rollover of the calendar year, because that's going to be one of the cheaper access points and one of the greatest utility access points. One other thought before we open it back up, and then we can dig into more of these takeaways. In December of 2022, Scott Connor proposed the any quarterback on a 2-deep theory. And what do we see at the bottom of this chart? A whole bunch of friction from 0 value to very low value. It's easy to make a player register on KTC. It's hard to elevate them to a certain point, and we can get into that in a second. But we see an increased number of lines at the bottom. That is quarterbacks gaining some sort of market value. That's people choosing keep or trade instead of cut for some of these backup quarterbacks. Not all the time, but enough times that they now register at the bottom of the chart as having some value. And so you mentioned fantasy analysts having an impact on the market. Scott Connor has done that. He has dragged down the value of a low-end QB2, a high-end QB3, and he has elevated the value of these backup quarterbacks.
I wonder if some injuries to some of the top end quarterbacks and seeing like Jake Browning do stuff got people interested in that just naturally as well. But also, as consistent as some of the trends are, I think that you pointing out that the quarterbacks kind of dip in value, and I think it kind of makes sense intuitively. Like, some quarterbacks have underwhelming seasons, and so we're kind of unreasonably down on them. I mean, I think Stroud, I think, who we knew was going to regress back to the mean a little bit, is he's still kind of like overvalued in the market, but I think he gets a little bit of hate, anecdotally, like he's a little bit lower valued because of the season he had, right? It was a bad season. They're like, I don't even want a piece of this guy anymore. Like, let's just move on. And so I think that there is, almost too much fluctuation when I'm looking at the top of the chart here with the top end quarterbacks. Like, there should, in my opinion, there should be even more of a steady trend line if we're being, honest with ourselves over time. That's just one piece of what you had mentioned, Tommy, that struck me. Jake, any thoughts there? Or otherwise?
No, I think that was going to be part of the actual advice I would say to take away from this. And it really does align with a lot of what I try and hone in on, especially post championship window. You're watching the NFL playoffs. I constantly speak about this, how your league mates more often than not will use the implications of what's occurring that just happened as going to be their register of a specific player. There was a huge Mark Andrews buy window immediately after he had probably one of the worst games of his career, sitting there in Buffalo after 2 drop touchdowns, right? Like, that is how the market is impacted. And we need to do a better job taking advantage of it. And to the point that you've been making here, Tommy, is like, if there is going to be a dip in acquiring elite quarterbacks, find it. Take action to it. If you do want to use up your future first and get rid of all your picks, now you know where your windows are to take advantage of players.
Takeaways you can't fully see on here, but that I've found. I've got other graphs I can share with the DU Discord. Really interesting to me is first round quarterbacks occupy the upper third of this KTC value chart. Second round quarterbacks, only if they become Jalen Hurts, can elevate to that tier. They don't get below the middle, or they don't get above or below the middle third typically. And unless your name is Dak Prescott or Tom Brady or Russell Wilson, anything beyond the second round never elevates to the middle third. There's very distinct caste systems within these KTC values, even if they do well at the quarterback position, especially if they do well at the running back position. Like, there's a ceiling that we're not seeing on this chart that is really, really compelling to me. And let's talk a little bit about that dip that you saw. I think it's partially the quarterback cast right now, the dynamics that are at play in the market of having Justin Herbert types. Just like CJ Stroud, Justin Herbert was elevated very, very high after his first or second year. There seems to be a natural progression of an elevation of quarterbacks who do really well as rookies. Even if they don't, they get an elevation in value. And then there's almost always a dip. Like, even if the quarterback is good, there's almost always a dip. And you see that dip sort of continue into a valley, regardless of their production, unless they're, one of the very top 5 quarterbacks. And then as these quarterbacks age, you see a rise in value again. And so to circle back to Justin Herbert, he is the perfect buy candidate because he's in his 26, 27-year window where he's about to rise in value if he continues on a normal trajectory based on the historical look at his career and you comp it to all of the other players. This is where I comp profiles, not players. You look at charts like this and you're almost certain to see a steady rise in Justin Herbert's KTC value, his market sentiment, for the next 3 years, next 4 years. It just happens. And so those are the moments where we should be capitalizing, where we see these market inefficiencies of really strong profiles that CJ Stroud isn't quite at yet. He's still in his valley experience unless he morphs into a top 5 or 6 quarterback, which as a pocket passer is kind of unlikely. The Joe Burrow experience is pretty rare. And so I would be more inclined to move into Justin Herbert than I would be to CJ Stroud today. Not because the production is different. To go back to that, the production is the same regardless of how these graphs move. But if we're to have a stabler asset, regardless of that production, Justin Herbert is more likely to be that stable asset than his younger counterpart.
Yeah, it's a super interesting observation. And why do we think that is? Is it just that the value is evening out because we realize like what that player actually is? Like, we're coming to terms with this is who he is, and like we can ride the wave now. Okay, that kind of makes sense. I think that makes sense intuitively. And yeah, the Stroud comment, just to be clear, was more on like it's very clear that he is being hurt from that season, and I think you can see that in these charts, like in general, that kind of happens. But great point nonetheless. This is an interesting one from Jay before we throw it back to Jake. Here looks like we end up with QB1, sorry, in the 6 to 10K range. QB2 is 4 to 6K range. QB3 is just around 2 to 3.2K. Then all the bums under 2K. Prior to 2024, this was much more distributed. And that's kind of what we were talking about, but I do think that's an interesting way to put it and kind of lay out those ranges that Tommy's talking about, where these players generally kind of sit depending on, their profile necessarily, like how good they are. And so it's definitely an interesting observation that those kind of tend to stay in those ranges over time, knowing that, unless they're an outlier, like you can kind of gauge what their value over time would be, right? Like that's part of this. Jake, any other thoughts here on what Tommy was saying?
No, but we were talking about positioning players literally on a graph. So let's talk about our player positions in general. Over the last few weeks, we've had Matt Wallman, been blessed. We've had Jagger May, also been blessed. They've talked about Harold Fannin Jr. in completely different ways. And, this isn't a unique experience with Harold Fannin. We see this all the time on many different assets, but specifically during, rookie prospect profiling season, you're going to see different perspectives from different people. So Wallman had said, saying Fannin is better at breaking back to the QB or general in and outs, breaking routes, where Njoku is more linear. And I think Billy had included this. I think both are like this, where he was saying like both in Njoku and in Harold Fannin. And then he was also going into both for Jagger May, having a hard time understanding the pick in general for Fannin, with Njoku being there, who does a lot of what they would hope Fannin would do, but he's already better. And, those are two completely differing approaches to one individual player. And the reason I think that we kind of want to think about this a little bit is to better understand, like, how do you approach a profile like that, where there's maybe two minds that you really respect. Shout out to Tacit Assassin, Zach Reed. I know you really give a lot of value to his rookie profiling and diving into all the prospects that he does. So, like, let's say Zach has a specific read and, JJ Zachariason is pushing out something in his Zap model that says the antithesis to Zach. Where is your mind going there?
Yeah, so you can take this all sorts of really interesting ways in my mind. You can look at the environment in which Fannin lives and say that the $78 million or whatever the Browns are going to have to pay for Deshaun Watson's albatross contract is necessitating a Vic Ketchman, old Steelers reporter. It's a game of replacement trope. Like, they can't afford to build a full cast around the quarterback, whoever that is, because the cap is real. As much as we want to ignore it, this is a game of replacement when you have an $80 million quarterback who isn't any good. And so the opportunity is likely to be there. When you get into player takes, I would like to, again, not think of them as players, as callous as that sounds. They're assets. And at this tier, at the third round, rookie draft level investment, what you need to do is be flexible. You need to be quick to pivot in that grouping of your rostership, right? So what is the upside of Fannin? I mean, he could catch 100 balls this year. I think that is somewhere in like the outlier range of outcomes. He could catch 0 and be entirely useless. What you need to do as a manager, if you're going to be drafting him, is have an action plan for both cases and somewhere in the middle. What are you willing to put up with this asset? It's great if Zach Reed is into a player. I do take that in high regard, but he doesn't manage my teams, and no dynasty analyst manages my teams. Like, I have to be responsible for my own actions. And so I drafted Fannin in a league called the 12 Olympians with 12 analysts, right? Like really sharp people. Zach is one of them. I drafted him. If he isn't any good, he's not going to be on my 32-man roster come week 6. I literally took every single rookie running back from waivers that was on an NFL roster. Somebody is going to drop another NFL rookie running back at some point. And Fannin is the first cut casualty, not because I don't believe in him. I absolutely do. But I am not going to put up with a developmental prospect at tight end on my roster unless they have like significant draft capital. If it's Warren or if it's Loveland, yeah, you might have to put up with a little bit more. With Fannin, you need to be churning that part of your roster much more than people probably do.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. Do you think, just quickly, like, do you think when you say cut candidate, do you think you'll be able to trade him in that league, or you will actually cut him from your roster? Like by week 6, if you're like, I need to get out of this guy.
I've mentioned this on a few shows. I value every roster spot as a second round pick or a potential second round pick. If I can get a 4th for him and I don't see that potential for a second round pick, of course I am going to, but it becomes a value-based bet. Like what is available in terms of the rostership that I am allowing myself versus where the upside is. Because I want to consume those portions of my roster. I want to actually start these players. And I hold those positions in extremely high regard. If I'm not starting them and they can't accumulate a second round value, I am happy to let somebody else blow their fab on that player. I'm ready to be wrong too. It's not like I think I'm right. It's just that I have built these guardrails around my process and I'm willing to do it.
That makes sense. And I think if you stick to your guns and you stick to your strategy, often those will work out if you have tested it out and you systematically work through it. So I dig that. I definitely understand it. Talk to us a little bit about Jackson Dart. This will be the last one before we get out of here. I know we're running a little bit longer than I said we would. We cannot help ourselves. But talk to us a little bit about Jackson Dart. I did hear you say on Superflex Super Show that you'd be willing to rank him at 104. I know that's probably not where you would necessarily because you don't have to, but I'd love to get your kind of thoughts behind, that sentiment.
We just looked at KTC values and we said first round quarterbacks occupy this space, second round quarterbacks go right below there. Anything below a second round value, like they're not really useful unless you're streaming them on an injury week, right? Jackson Dart is a first round quarterback. He has rushing upside. We just saw 5 or 6 quarterbacks get drafted in the first round last year. We didn't learn our lesson when they accrued value. JJ McCarthy accrued value, didn't play a single meaningful snap of football. We never learn our lesson with this. And am I being extreme by pushing Jackson Dart all the way up to the 104, the 105? I mean, maybe, but it's Jackson Dart or who? I don't want to draft these tight ends, these first round tight ends in the first round of my rookie draft, unless it's like a 2.0 premium. And even then they live in the back part of the first round at best. Cam Ward, he is my 102. What else am I going to get? Am I going to get a first round wide receiver? There were great first round wide receivers last year. There will be great first round wide receivers next year. So it becomes a running back or quarterback question for me. We only got a couple of these running backs that got first or second round draft capital, which is sort of the benchmark to me of a first round worthy running back. And so it's sort of a process of elimination. Who do I want to put in these tiers? They can't be empty. Somebody has to make a draft pick. I know we can kick draft capital down the road, but what I want to do is respect the fact that a first round quarterback is, yes, a 50-50 bet, but they literally almost always accumulate value throughout the year. It's almost a no risk bet. It's kind of like a bond that could turn into a winning scratch off lottery ticket. And if Dart hits, I'm not paying the 104. I'm usually paying like the 110 to 204. Okay. Then I've just got myself 2 or 3 first round picks in value. And I'm very likely to move off of and be down on Jackson Dart at that point and trade into the next 26-year-old quarterback that has a really good, historical profile. And so what it is for me is just, it's respect for what Dart is and represents and always will represent. Next year's first round quarterbacks, they're probably going to be in my top 6 as well.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Really good stuff. I'm sure you've had a lot of success moving back from anywhere really high to get back to him. But like, if you were stuck up at the 104 or 5 or whatever, are you just going to smash like Travis Hunter or whatever's there? Or are you going to take Jackson Dart knowing
Taking
what
Jackson
you
Dart.
just said? You will.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And like you said, you kind of stick to your guns and you're going to do these things that you say. And so I love that stuff. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Listen, man, thank you, Tommy, so much for joining us. I mean, I really appreciate the candid and insightful conversations. Like that's what we're all about here. So, we really appreciate your time. You gave us a bunch of it, and we're definitely going to have you back on. So we will be talking again. But yeah, man, you can find Tommy at Superflex Super Show. You can find him on Blue Sky, right? You're on Blue Sky at Tommy Blair. Anything else before we get out of here, Jake, Tommy, anything?
No, I think realistically, we covered a lot of what kind of goes on behind the lens of how you want to interact with your league mates. And by that, I mean, really have a good understanding of what they're doing. So much of what we care about on a week-to-week basis as individuals is what we're doing. Care more about what your league mates are doing. Tommy's always talking about it. We're always talking about it. Use that as kind of your own weakness. I care too much about what my league mates are doing. No such thing. Like, drive what their actions are to make your actions better is the way that I see it. So much of what we talked about today kind of hones in on that from different lenses. And, the last thing is, don't tell people what to do in your leagues. Don't tell your friends what to do. don't tell your family members what to do. Let them be people. Give them the small wins. Always give the other people the small wins.
Gentle
and
nudges,
Tommy's wearing a
gentle
great
nudges.
tuxedo. Yeah.
Tommy looks fabulous tonight. Tommy, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, I just want to say you guys are great analysts. You're better people. I really enjoy getting to talk with you guys, getting to interact. Keep up the good work. I love listening. I listen every week. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Awesome. Likewise, man. Likewise. All right, we're going to get out of here. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Take care, and we'll catch you next week. Peace out.